He watched another alpha lead her to dance. Then the Alpha King said, "She is spoken for." I did not notice her until someone else did. That is the part I cannot forgive myself for, not the blindness itself, which a man can explain away with duty and governance, and the 10,000 daily pressures of holding a river fortress together across a decade of hard seasons. No, what I cannot forgive is that it took another man's interest to make me see her. That it took the particular way Lord Fenwick of the Durin Lowlands let his gaze settle on her across the length of my feast hall, patient, calculating, the look of a man who has decided he wants a thing and is only working out how to take it, to make something in my chest go very, very still, and then begin, quietly, to burn. She had been in my household for 2 years. 2 years in which Sela had kept the lower archive in better order than it had known in living memory, had fielded 17 disputes between my stewards without once raising her voice, had quietly fixed 3 clerical errors in my revenue ledgers that would have caused considerable grief by the spring counting. 2 years in which she had moved through Varath Hold with the easy precision of someone who has decided exactly how much space she requires in this world, and intends to take no more and no less. She was not invisible. I want to be clear about that because a man who says the woman he came to love was invisible to him is usually lying or trying to excuse something. Sela was never invisible. She was simply present, consistent. The way the stone floors were present, the way the river sound through the eastern wall was present. I had registered her the way I registered reliable things, with the passive, ungrateful certainty that they would always be there. And then Fenwick arrived, and I discovered that reliable things can be taken. He came to Varath Hold on the first morning of the 10th month, under a sky the color of old iron, with 12 riders and a gift chest, and the treaty terms folded into his breast pocket. The Durin Lowlands had been pressing for favorable passage rights through my western corridors for 3 years. My council had grown tired of delaying. I had agreed to 3 days of talks because it was efficient, and because I do not like things to drag. Fenwick himself I had met twice before at the Southern Accords 4 years ago, and briefly at the Midsummer Tithe gathering 2 years past. He was a capable alpha, broad-shouldered and deliberate, the kind of man who treated every room as a problem he was in the process of solving. I had no strong feeling about him. He was a guest. I intended to keep things professional and brief. He walked into my great hall that first evening, accepted a cup of welcome ale, surveyed the room with the comfortable authority of a man who does this often. And then, in the way a compass needle finds north without hurry, without drama, his gaze settled on Sela. She was standing near the eastern pillar, speaking quietly with my head steward Oren about the following morning's schedule. She had a leather folio tucked under one arm and a small ink mark on the side of her left hand that she hadn't noticed yet. Her attention was on Oren completely. She was not performing ease. She simply was at ease, the way she always was when she was working, and it gave her a quality that I suppose a man arriving fresh to the room might find striking. A woman thoroughly herself, not arranged for anyone's benefit, not waiting to be looked at. Fenwick looked at her for 3 seconds, 4. Then he looked away and turned to me with a warm, practiced smile, and we began the pleasantries. I noticed that he had looked. I told myself I had noticed because I notice everything in my hall. That is a king's job. I was already lying to myself, and I didn't know it yet. The first day of talks went as these things do, careful, slightly exhausting, a great deal of language deployed in the service of saying almost nothing, both sides measuring. Fenwick was good at it. He had a quality I had observed before, an attentive stillness when the other party was speaking, the kind that made people feel heard and slightly disarmed. I was not disarmed, but I respected the technique. We covered the broad framework in the morning, broke for the midday meal, returned to the specifics in the afternoon. By early evening, we had outlined the shape of an agreement and agreed to sleep on the particulars. Sela came through the council chamber at the end of the day's session to collect the working documents and cross-reference them against the archive copies before the next morning. This was her job. She had done it at every treaty session, every external delegation for 2 years. I had never given it particular thought. She set her folio on the side table, greeted my council members by name, Councillor Aldris first, because Aldris was oldest and noticed being acknowledged. Then Wren, who handled the ledgers. Then my advisor Tam gathered the papers with practiced efficiency and was halfway to the door when Fenwick said, pleasantly, "You are the archivist here." She paused, turned. "Household archivist and records keeper, my lord." Sela, He said it the way people say a word they want to remember. Lord Fenwick of the Durin Lowlands, you have the treaty drafts now. I do. I'll have a clean cross-referenced copy ready for both parties by dawn. You work through the night. She gave him the particular small smile I had, apparently seen 100 times without really seeing, slightly dry, not unkind. The smile of someone who has been asked an obvious question and is deciding how charitable to be. When the session requires it, my lord, yes. That's dedication, Fenwick said. Not flattery or not only flattery, something more considered. It's the job, Sella said, and she left. Fenwick watched the door for a moment after she had gone. Then he turned back to the table and resumed the conversation as though nothing had happened. But I had seen the quality of his attention in that moment. Quiet, measuring, the look of a man who has added something to a private accounting. My wolf, somewhere deep in my chest where I had long since taught it to stay quiet, shifted. I told it to be still. It was not still. The second day of talks was sharper. We were down to specifics now, the precise corridors, the timed schedules, the compensation arrangements, and these always created friction. Fenwick and I sparred carefully across the table for most of the morning. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us conceded the points that mattered yet. Outside, the autumn rain had arrived and was working steadily against the eastern wall, and the river sound beneath it was deeper than usual, heavy with the early season. Sella appeared at the chamber door mid-afternoon with the cross-referenced documents and a note from Councillor Aldris about a discrepancy in the corridor boundary description. She presented this to me quietly, waited while I reviewed it, then turned to address the discrepancy with Fenwick's own scribe, a lean young man named Dorset, with the matter-of-fact precision that she brought to everything. I watched her work. This was new. Or rather, this was not new. I was simply doing it consciously now for what felt like the first time, and the discovery was uncomfortable because I couldn't explain what had changed. She spoke to Dorset with patient specificity. Here is where the boundary description in your draft conflicts with the standing charter records. Here is the primary document. Here is my reading of the discrepancy. What is your reading? No performance, no softening of the problem, no edge either. Just the clean operation of a capable mind. Fenwick had stopped the side conversation he was having with my advisor Tam, and was watching her too. The burning in my chest, which I had been ignoring since the previous evening by applying every tool of self-discipline I possessed, got 2 degrees hotter. When she left the room, Fenwick waited a beat, then said to me not quite casually, "Your archivist is exceptional." "Yes," I said. My voice was level. I am good at level. "How long has she been in the household?" 2 years. Unattached. The word was perfectly bland. A reasonable question between 2 alphas, pack logistics, household status, nothing unusual. I had asked similar questions about households I visited in a practical spirit, meaning nothing personal. "She carries no pack mark," I said, which was true and was not an answer. Fenwick nodded, filed this away, and returned to the treaty terms. I stared at the document in front of me, and read the same paragraph 4 times without retaining a word of it. That night I did not sleep well, which is unusual for me. I am not given to sleeplessness. I have governed a river fortress through flood seasons and pack disputes and 2 succession challenges. I sleep like a man who has learned that worrying in the dark accomplishes nothing. But I lay in my chamber with the rain on the eastern wall and the river running heavy below, and I was awake, which told me something was wrong, because nothing in the day's treaty talks warranted it. What I was thinking about, what I kept returning to, the thing I kept moving away from and finding myself back at, was Fenwick saying, "How long has she been in the household?" And then, unattached, and then me sitting there saying nothing useful while he filed the information away with the calm patience of a man who is planning something. I knew what he was planning. I am not obtuse. A capable man observes an unattached woman in a neighboring household, takes the measure of her in a single evening's conversation, and asks practical questions. This is not unusual behavior. This is not, by any reasonable standard, an offense. I told myself this. My wolf disagreed with considerable intensity. I lay there in the dark and examined myself with the thorough, unflattering honesty that sleeplessness tends to produce, and what I found was this. I did not want Fenwick to pursue Sella. I did not want him to speak to her again in that particular attending way he had. I did not want her going to the Durin Lowlands as some kind of attached arrangement, some household position Fennec dressed up as opportunity. I did not want her to go anywhere. I stopped, started again. I wanted her to remain exactly where she was, in my household, in my archive, moving through my hold with that clean, unglamorous competence and the ink mark on her left hand. I wanted to hear her voice in the corridor outside the council chamber the way I always had, as background, as constant as the river sound through the wall. Except that I was now aware that it was not background. It had never been background. It was only that I had been facing the wrong direction. 2 years. I had been a fool for 2 years, and it had taken 3 days of watching another man notice her to show me the shape of it. My wolf was utterly unsympathetic. It had apparently known for some time. It had simply been waiting for me to catch up. 3rd day dawned clear and cold, the rain gone, the sky a hard autumn blue over the river. We completed the treaty terms by mid-morning, the corridor agreements, the schedule, the compensation structure, and I signed the document with Fennec across the council table with the requisite formal weight. It was a good agreement. Vareth Hold's western approaches were secured on favorable terms. The Durin Lowlands got what they had been asking for, and everyone at the table would be able to report a success. Under other circumstances, I would have felt the quiet satisfaction I usually feel when a negotiation concludes cleanly. I felt instead a low-level tension I could not justify, because the treaty was done and Fennec's formal business was complete, which meant that the closing feast that evening would be the last occasion before his party rode south in the morning. Last occasion for him to act on whatever calculation he had been running since the first evening. I told myself I was being unreasonable. I told myself that Sela was a capable adult who could manage an alpha's interest without my intervention. I told myself that whatever my wolf was insisting on, I had no standing to act on it. I had said nothing to Sela. I had made no indication. I had not once in 2 years given her any reason to think. I told myself a great many things. I believed almost none of them. The closing feast filled the great hall by early evening, my council, my senior staff, Fennec's 12 riders and his scribe Dorset, the household in its formal arrangement. The long tables were set with the autumn service, candlelight and the smell of the river coming through the high windows. It was, by any measure, a pleasant occasion. The treaty had been completed, the terms were fair, both parties had reason to be in good humor. I sat at the head table, and I was not in good humor. I watched Fennec move through the room. He had a social grace I would have admired in a less compromised state of mind. Warm, attentive, the kind of guest who makes a feast feel like it was arranged for everyone's benefit. He spoke with Aldris, genuinely engaged, about the flood management work on the lower river. He spoke with Wren about the ledger notations that bore on the corridor agreement. He was, in short, excellent. And then, with the meal concluded, and the room moving into the closing portion of the evening, he found Sela. She was near the side table, speaking with Orin again, always working, even at a feast, which was so completely like her that I felt something shift in my chest at the sight of it, something that had no name yet but was very close to tenderness. Fennec approached her with easy confidence, said something I was too far across the hall to hear, and she looked up from the document she'd been referencing and gave him the small, dry, not unkind smile. They talked 2 minutes. 3, I watched Dorset, Fennec's scribe, drift away from his cluster of Vareth staff and come to stand nearby. Positioned, I registered, as a kind of social clearance, the way an aide positions himself to give his lord room to operate. Then the musicians in the hall's corner moved into the treaty dance, the formal closing piece, a Vareth tradition, slow and processional, the kind of thing guests were expected to participate in as a gesture of accord. Fennec turned from Sela to the floor and then turned back and offered her his hand. She hesitated, a half-second, the kind of hesitation that a woman makes not because she is afraid, but because she is thinking, weighing something, reading something in the situation. Then her hand began to move toward his. I was already standing. I was not aware of having decided to stand. My body had made the decision while my thoughts were still arranging themselves into something coherent, which is, I understand now, what happens when the thing driving you is older and more certain than thought. My wolf did not pause to consult me. My wolf had already crossed the calculation and arrived at the conclusion days ago, and it had simply been waiting for the moment that would make me move. I moved. The hall is not small. I crossed it in the time it took Sella's hand to travel halfway to Phoenix, which felt to me like a very long time and was probably 6 or 7 seconds. I did not run. I did not raise my voice. I walked across my own hall the way I walk into a council chamber where something has gone wrong, with the controlled pace of a man who knows exactly what he is about to do and is not going to be deflected from it. Fennec saw me coming with 2 steps to spare. He had very good instincts. His expression went careful, not hostile, a man recalculating. I stopped at Sella's side. She had turned to look at me. Her hand was suspended between them, belonging to neither direction, and her dark eyes were on my face with an expression I could not yet fully read, surprised, yes, but beneath the surprise something else, something guarded and watchful, and I thought not entirely without hope. I looked at Fennec. She is spoken for, I said. The hall did not go dramatically silent all at once. Silence in a room full of people happens in a wave, table by table, voice by voice. The music trailing off last as the musicians lost their count and looked up to find out why the room had changed. By the time I was fully aware of the quiet around me, it was already complete. Fennec held my gaze for a moment. He was a careful man, and he was reading the situation with the same attending quality he brought to everything. What he read, I think, was this. The treaty was signed, and his party was leaving in the morning, and the Alpha King of Varath Hold was standing 6 inches from his archivist looking like a man who had made an irrevocable decision and would not be backing away from it. Fennec withdrew his hand. He did it with dignity, I will give him that, and with a small, almost rueful incline of his head toward Sella. I apologize, he said to her quietly. I wasn't aware. No one was, Sella said. Her voice was perfectly level. She was looking at me, not at him. Fennec stepped back. Someone among his riders murmured something. Dorset made a quiet noise that might have been acknowledgement. The moment passed. The musicians, after a beat of uncertainty, began the treaty dance again, and the room slowly resumed itself. The way a room does when something has happened and everyone has decided by collective agreement to treat it as having been resolved. I became aware that Sella was still looking at me. I became aware that I had no idea what to say next. I had crossed a hall full of witnesses and spoken a claim aloud before I had said a single private word to her about any of this. I had, in the space of 3 days, gone from failing to notice her to declaring her spoken for in front of my entire court, without consulting her once, without giving her the slightest indication that any of this was coming, without. I took inventory of this with growing discomfort, any discussion of whether she had any interest in being spoken for by me. These are, I recognized, significant omissions. Sella, I said, and then stopped, because I had nothing to follow it with that didn't sound either pompous or pathetic, and I am a man who prefers silence to either. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, with the dry precision that was, I understood now, one of the things I had been hearing for 2 years without knowing I was listening. You've been my Alpha King for 2 years, my lord. You might have mentioned this earlier. I know, I said. You had considerable opportunity. I know. You've never once, she stopped, took a breath. Something in her expression shifted. The guard didn't lower exactly, but it became a different kind of guard, less protective, more careful, the way a person looks when they are deciding how much of a true thing to say. You've never looked at me, she said quietly, the way you just looked across this hall. I was looking at you, I said. I didn't understand what I was seeing. The quiet between us was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of 2 people who have just arrived at the same place from different directions, and are taking a moment to recognize each other. And now, she asked. Now, I said, I understand it completely. What happened next was not a ceremony. I want to be clear about that, because the telling of these things has a tendency to acquire formality and gravity that the actual moments do not always possess. What happened next was that I offered Sella my arm, which she looked at for a moment with the considering expression she brought to everything, and then took. We stepped onto the floor for the remaining portion of the treaty dance, which was, all things considered, appropriate, and we danced it in the particular silence of 2 people who have a great deal to say to each other and have agreed, without words, that the hall full of witnesses is not the right setting for it. My wolf was very, very quiet. Not the alert, watchful quiet of the past 3 days, not the coiled tension of something waiting for the moment to act. A different quiet. The quiet of a thing that has been searching for a long time and has found what it was looking for and has finally, with considerable relief, put the search down. Counselor Aldris caught my eye from the head table. He had the expression of a man who has been quietly waiting for something to happen for an unspecified period of time and is experiencing something very close to satisfaction at being present when it finally does. I will have questions for Aldris later, I think, about how long he has known things that I did not. Oren, predictably, already had the philosophical distance of a man who will simply update his household records to reflect the new arrangement and ask no questions. I have always appreciated this about Oren. Fennec's party broke camp the following morning early, before the full light. He signed the treaty riders as arranged, and his 12 men were gone from the Varath hold courtyard by the time the river mist had fully lifted. Before he rode, Fennec paused in the courtyard, looked at me with the particular expression of a man making peace with a calculation that didn't land the way he had intended, and said, "She's a fine match, Voss. A king who knows what he has is a rarer thing than it should be." "I was slow to know it," I said. "You knew it when it mattered," he said. He was not wrong. Then he rode south, and his party disappeared into the autumn blue beyond the Varath gates, and I stood in the courtyard for a moment in the cold morning air, with the river running heavy behind the eastern wall and the smell of the season turning, and felt the particular cleanness of a thing that is, at last, in order. I found Sela in the lower archive that afternoon. She was where I might have predicted at the long table under the narrow windows, with the treaty copies spread before her and the corrections from the morning's writer signing to incorporate. She had her folio open. She had the ink mark on her left hand again, a different one today, slightly higher on her wrist. She looked up when I came in and did not look surprised, which told me she had been expecting me at some point. I sat across from her at the long table, which I had never done before. I am not, as a rule, a man who sits in archivists' workspaces, but sitting seemed like the appropriate thing, a conversation at her table rather than standing in a doorway, which felt more honest. "I owe you," I said, "a conversation I should have had some time ago." "You owe me several," she said, but she set her pen down, which was invitation enough. I told her the truth. Not all of it at once, I am not built for that, and there is a kind of honesty that is its own form of overwhelm, and Sela did not deserve to be overwhelmed. I told her the shape of it, that I had been blind to what was in front of me, and that this was my failure, and that I was not asking her to account for it or forgive it on a timeline that suited me. That what I had said in the hall the previous night was true, and that I understood it gave her no choice in what came next. That a declaration made before a full court was a pressure I had placed on her without her consent, and I was sorry for the form of it, even if the substance of it was not something I intended to take back. She listened with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, complete, unhurried, taking it in rather than simply waiting for her turn to speak. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You know what I noticed," she said finally, "when you were walking across the hall last night." "Tell me." "You look terrified," she said. "Not angry, not territorial, terrified," the dry smile. "I've seen you face a succession challenge from your Western cousins without that expression. But apparently the thought of me taking someone's hand was enough to—" She stopped. Something gentler moved through her expression. "I noticed that," she said more quietly. "I've been noticing things about you for 2 years, Cad Voss, the way you are in this hold, the way you listen to your staff when you think no one is observing you listening. The way your counsel doesn't know you already know the answer when they're explaining something to you." A pause. "I had decided it would come to nothing, that you would remain exactly as you were, looking at me the way you look at the stone floors." The accuracy of this landed precisely as it should. "I looked at you the way I look at the stone floors," I said, because I had made the mistake of thinking that reliable things remain without any particular care. "Yes," she said, "that is in fact the mistake. I'm aware of it now." "Good," she picked up her pen, considered it, set it down again. "The mate bond," she said carefully. "Yes. You felt it last night." "I think I had been feeling it longer than that," I said. I considered how to say it. "I think I had been sitting on top of it without knowing what it was, and watching Fennec walk toward you was the thing that told me." She absorbed this. "It isn't nothing," she said. "A mate bond, I want to be clear that I understand what this is." "It is not nothing," I agreed. "But it is also not an instruction. You are not required to. Cadden, she used my name without the title, which she had not done before, and the particular quality of it, the way she said it, like a thing she had decided to stop holding back, landed somewhere in my chest that had no diplomatic name. I've been in this hold for 2 years, she said. I have not gone anywhere. I looked at her. That, I said, is the most important thing anyone has said to me in a decade. She smiled, not the dry, economical smile she gave to questions that required patience, but something else, something that was her own and had been waiting behind all the other expressions for precisely the right moment. The archive, she said, is going to need to update its staffing records. Oren will handle it without a word. Oren has already handled it, she said. He sent me a note this morning. I looked at her, she looked at me. The winter light came through the narrow windows at a low angle and caught the ink mark on her wrist. I should have looked, I said. Yes, she said simply, but you're looking now. The mate bond was formally recognized at the winter solstice ceremony, 6 weeks after Fennec's party rode south, and the last of the autumn storms had settled into early frost. It was not a large ceremony. I do not, as a rule, care for spectacle, but it was witnessed by the full council and the senior household staff, which is what the hold's tradition required. Sella stood beside me in the great hall in the same gown she would have worn to any formal council occasion, not performing anything, not attempting to be something other than herself. My wolf, standing somewhere in my chest with the particular patience of something that has always known, looked at her and was simply, completely at peace. Aldris made a speech. It was longer than necessary. It was also, I will admit, genuinely moving, because Aldris has been in this hold for 30 years and has seen things I have not, and spoke about what a hold becomes when its alpha stops governing it like a problem to be managed and starts caring for it like something worth keeping. I did not entirely understand, until he said it, that he was talking about me. Sella, at my side, made a small sound that might have been laughter contained very professionally. I looked at her. She looked forward, perfectly composed, the corner of her mouth a quiet record of everything she was not saying. After, in the corridor outside the hall, in the first quiet moment we had managed, I took her hand. She let me. Her fingers were cold. She is always cold in the early winter. I had somehow registered this without registering that I had registered it, and I held them between mine without ceremony or announcement, because the ceremony was done and what remained was simply this: the truth of a thing at last in the open, with all the time in the world to build something from it. The records, I said. Amended. Oren's note. Filed in the household ledger under material changes to standing arrangements. He cross-referenced it to the treaty session dates. She paused. He does not miss very much. No, I agreed, neither it turns out to you. She looked up at me with the expression that I was only beginning to map, the one that was specifically her, the one that required no interpretation, the one that had apparently been there, available to me for 2 years, and that I had been too governed by my own careful habits to see. You noticed me eventually, she said. When it mattered, I said, Fennec's words, and they were still true. When someone else did, she said, with the precision she brings to everything. Yes, I said. That is also true, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She considered this. I'm not sure, she said slowly, whether to be annoyed or to find it entirely characteristic. I think it's characteristic, I said. I think I'm a man who has been governing for long enough that I stopped looking for things I hadn't decided I needed. And then someone arrived who was necessary before I'd made that decision, and I was too locked into my own habits to recognize it. And that is on me, and I'm aware of it, and I intend to spend a considerable amount of time making sure you are never in doubt about. I stopped. I am not, as I have said, built for this kind of speech. The words were true, but they felt clumsy, and Sella was watching me with an expression that was both patient and, very faintly, fond. Cadden, she said. Yes. Stop governing at me, she said. You don't have to manage this, it's already happened. The river sound through the eastern wall, the cold light in the corridor, her hand still between mine. All right, I said. All right, she said. And it was, in all the ways that count, in the ways that last, in the ways that a man carries with him when everything else in a long life has been stripped back to what is real. It was entirely, completely already done. Not built by ceremony or announced by declaration or fixed into the record by Oren's careful handwriting, though all of those things had their place. Done in the lower archive, at a table under narrow windows, in the quiet of an afternoon when a woman who had been present and reliable and entirely herself for 2 years looked at a king who had finally, slowly, looked back, and neither of them felt any need to reach for different words, because the true ones had already been spoken in the hall in front of everyone before he could stop himself. She is spoken for. He just hadn't known, until that moment, that he'd been the one holding the claim all along.